As we know, communication can differ across cultures in a variety of different ways. For example, in social skills, in one country, eye contact, or in one culture, eye contact could mean being polite and respectful while someone's talking, and in another culture, it could be seen as rude or disrespectful and is not acceptable in that culture. And I think it's very important that we need to be aware of those cultural differences because as SLPs or audiologists in the professional setting, we need to be able to accommodate to that individual and their culture, so we are respectful towards them. And cultures can also vary in speech and language. And for this assignment, that is what we're focusing on. And I chose to look at the Chinese culture versus our culture because I figured that we would have a lot of differences, because I thought that our cultures were so opposite, but it turns out we have more similarities than we do differences, and so I found that really interesting. And I couldn't find a lot of information before 1 year of age for the Chinese culture, and so I kind of focused on the 12-month to 2-year range. And so at 12 months for a Chinese child, or in the Chinese culture, they can understand 72 words and they can produce 12. And whereas in our culture, we can only respond to simple verbal requests such as no. And so that's more of like the one-worded request from like your parents or like someone, like a caregiver. And we can only produce 1 to 2 words. So that's a pretty large gap. Whereas someone in the Chinese culture can produce 12 and we can only produce 1 to 2. And then at 16 months of age, in the Chinese culture, they can understand 121 words and produce 39 words. Whereas in our culture, we can use 10 to 20 words. So again, that's a very large gap where they have surpassed us by a lot. And then we go down to the 17 months for a individual in the Chinese culture, and they can produce 59 words. And then at 30 months, which is about 2.5 years, they can produce 594 words, and individuals in our culture can produce 450 words. So that's not as much of a gap, but it's still, they're still producing more words at this point than we are. And then they're very similar to the English-speaking children, because during 17 to 30 months of age, there's a substantial growth in amount of words and word acquisition during that time period, because it goes from 59 to 594 for a child in the Chinese culture. And I don't have the exact number for how many words we can produce at 17 months, but it stated that it was very similar to what to where we are in that range. And then also our receptive and expressive language and understanding of that is also very similar with the Chinese culture. And then for language, Chinese children hear more verbs than their English-speaking peers, whereas we hear more nouns. And so our words, we hear sentences like, that's mommy's toy, or look at the doggy. And so we are focused more on those nouns, and they have a lot more verbs than we do. So we're flip-flopped in that aspect. And then data reported showing similarities to the English phonological system, especially with respect to fronting of consonants, phonological context dependence, non-native language phoneme substitution, which is an example is glottal replacement, and omission and addition of phonemes. And so those articulation disorders are very similar to that of ours. And then in the Chinese culture, an estimated of 800,000 children under age 7 are estimated to have a hearing loss. And then that is expected to grow by about 20 to 30,000 a year, which is a lot of children having hearing loss. And then an estimated of 30,000 are born with hearing loss each year. So there's about 800,000 who have one under the age of 7, about 30,000 who are born with it, and that is expected to grow by 20 to 30,000.